Okay, hey everybody, happy Wednesday. I want to welcome you all back if you've been here before. My name's Dr. Roney. We're going to be joined tonight by Dr. Ptak, and tonight we're going to talk about epigenetics, or how your environment changes your gene expression, and then how that leads to chronic disease, or can lead to chronic disease. So a really, really good topic. I think it's, as you'll see, I think it's one of the more instrumental, tests that we should be doing on everybody based on the latest research. So I think you'll get a lot out of it. It's one of my favorite topics. It's a little complex, so we're going to try to make it easy. But that's the topic tonight. If you're new to the cancer conversation, I want to take the opportunity to welcome you as well. What I guess the goal and objective of the class is obviously to give information and articulate, I think, that information that can help you through your journey, whether it's you're doing prevention, or you have cancer and you're looking for the best plan of action, or you are trying to prevent reoccurrence. I mean, those three major demographics are who this class and this conversation is designed for. And I think, and I say it all the time, I think one of the best things that we could do for you is allow you to understand, right, from what we're doing, what other healthcare providers are doing, and collect a lot of information so you can make a very, very, detailed plan that you feel very comfortable with. And when you feel that comfortable, it takes away a lot of anxiety, right? So we'll do a review like I always do, and we'll talk about the 4-pillar approach that we use here at the clinic, that I think, based on years and years of experience and based on my own, personal battles, as well as being a clinician, that I feel super good about articulating it, but I feel good that it's put my mind at ease too, based on my history. So I think coming from that patient and clinician standpoint is a benefit here, because if you've all sat down with me, my brain works, or listened to me, my brain works very analytically, and it feels a lot better when I have a step-by-step plan and a process in place. So having said that, before I go into the 4 pillars and do the review, I want to give you, a little story. What this week, my son, he got done high school baseball a couple weeks ago. He's a pitcher. He was a junior this year, so he's going into a senior year. So his freshman or sophomore year, he did really, really well. Was pretty much the ace on the JV staff. They had high expectations coming into his junior year. In the fall, they tweaked his mechanics a little bit, which, if you play golf at all, or you know anything about mechanical adjustments to a pitcher or a golfer, for example, sometimes it could get in your head. And I think it got in his head, and he was thinking too much, and he didn't have a great year. He ended up really well, didn't have a great year. The point I'll make with that is he came to me and he said, "Hey, I didn't like the way that the season went. I don't want that to happen again. What can we do?" So what we did with him, similar to this whole 4-pillar plan, and I think this is a good parallel, is we made a plan, right? I drew a pie chart, basically. I broke it up into 8 different slices. So there's 8 different triangles, if you will, and we filled them in. One of them was his nutrition. One of them was his training. One of them was his mechanical work, right? One of them was his fielding practice as a pitcher. One of them was his pickoff moves, etc. The point is, we filled all those 8 up with things that he felt like he needed the most work on. And I allowed him, or I don't say made him, do most of the thinking, because I wanted him to have ownership in this, right? So we laid that out, and then he felt good with all 8 things collectively that he was going to work on. And then what we did, we listed those 8 things and created details, very specific details for each one of those, right? And we spent probably 8 to 10 hours on this over the course of 3 days, right? Over the weekend. And so when he got done, he put the pen down and he said, I feel so good. And he said, I feel like, without question, I'm going to get better this summer, and I won't have a repeat, because he felt so good about the plan. right? So he basically went from like, oh, I don't want this to happen again. I'm nervous this is going to happen again. I want to be great, all those things, to, oh my gosh, I laid out a plan. I helped him with it, but he did a lot of the writing. He did a lot of the brainstorming. So he had total ownership in it. And he felt really good. So he's going through the summer now. He has his dry board up. He's got all his tasks laid out day to day. And he feels wonderful that he's going to maximize his upside and mitigate his downside after coming off a rough year, right? So the 4 pillars, gang, really is designed to do the same thing. So let's go through it. If you're new, again, we'll lay it out. I know a lot of you have been on before, and most of you, I think, really appreciate the review, because again, this stuff, it's so common to me or to us, but hearing it over and over again, I think is a real benefit. And I hope you feel that way. If you don't, you can hit mute for a couple minutes and then we'll get into the topic at hand. But before we do that, let me just kind of go through here. All right. So if you're new to the cancer conversation, our clinic is located in Irvine, California. It is a 30,000 square foot center, half wellness, that we see patients with, that are coming in just to stay well overall, but autoimmune, and we see thyroid, and we see different ailments, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, things like that on the wellness side. And then on the other side, 15,000 square foot facility is designated for integrative cancer care. So Irvine, California, nice area, 20 minutes from the beach. So it's a good general area to be in if you had to be away, right? And then, so going through, my background is in functional medicine. I started in sports medicine, rehab, chiropractic, realized fairly quickly that if I'm working on the physical body, but leaving out the metabolic system, I'm not going to get people well. And I realized more and more people were getting sicker and sicker from the inside out. So I went back to school probably 2004. And since then I've been learning functional medicine, which is really how to restore proper function when somebody becomes ill, whether it's chronic disease or chronic fatigue or some of those different things that happen. So my background goes everything from inflammation control, gut health, looking at infections, looking at mycotoxins and toxins, and reviewing adrenals and hormones and thyroid and blood sugar, looking a lot of the things that we'll talk about tonight in Pillar 4, basically what potentially caused the chronic disease or cancer that you may have, or what do we want to do to prevent it. Dr. Ptak, Dr. Keneally may be in briefly, but Dr. Ptak, licensed naturopathic doctor, she is Princeton grad, so she's extremely intelligent, extremely thorough. And one of her, I don't want to say specialties, but one of her niches is definitely epigenetics, which is the, real quick, when we're talking about genes and DNA, it's how your environment, right? Your surrounding environment, whether it's foods or your lifestyle or traumas or stressors or whatever, how they affect your genes and your DNA. And it causes these genes to express themselves. And real quick, when those genes express themselves, it causes problems in your metabolic pathways that if you're not aware of, we could be working way down here. But if we knew that there was some gene mutations going on that were expressing themselves, we could work on it way upstream. So the gist of it is that we're all born with mutations, but lifestyle causes our lifestyle, stress, trauma, environmental factors, etc., cause those genes to start expressing themselves and turn on. And when they're on, it's kind of like a faucet wide open. It could affect metabolic pathways. So the testing that we'll talk about, I think, is one of the most important that we could do to start getting more upstream in your care. And when I say upstream, I mean, the major cause could be some epigenetic factors or gene expressions that are happening in your body. We'll talk about that. So Dr. Ptak's going to be on to talk more in depth about that. And her and I will have a good dialogue going back and forth as far as teaching that for you. Okay. So let's talk about the 4 pillars. Okay. So pillar number one is going to be the testing, right? So what I recommend when I was talking about my son and what we did with him, I recommend you actually, if you're under care here or thinking about it or trying to lay out a plan, I would lay out pillar number one, right? I would write it down. And then I did this for a patient last week. And what I wanted to do with her is lay out exactly what she was doing so she could see how thorough it was. So I see it, right? I look at it and go, wow, this is great. A lot of you, if you've met with me, I'll give you my opinion on, hey, this is an A+. You're doing everything I would do. And that's how I like to do it. I like to evaluate it if it were me. And I give my opinion on that. So this patient, we laid out pillar number one, and we wrote out RGCC tests, which I'll talk about. We looked at the PHI nagalase. We looked at the D dimers. We looked at the cancer antigens. We looked at, she had scans done and MRIs and things like that. So the testing in pillar number one checked all the boxes. It was the standard tests and then the tests that we do, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we wrote out pillar number two. What is she doing in the kill phase? So pillar two is, how do we kill it? How do we starve it? How do we oxygenate the body? And how do we alkalize the body, right? So pillar two is perhaps one of the most important, in the sense that if I have active cancer, what are we going to do to actually kill those cells? Do we need to do chemo, radiation, surgery? Not us, but is that something that the patient needs? Do we do fractionated chemo, which is more of a lower dose chemo, but something may need to be done aggressively to kill those cancer cells. So we have the kill phase, the starve phase, and the starve phase is basically based on the book by Jay McClellan, How to Starve Cancer. So there's repurposed drugs that can be tested via the RGCC test, which I'll talk about, that can tell us if you're sensitive to those, that would be helpful to starving the cancer cells, right? Then we have the oxygenation part. If, for example, well, I'll get into it, but the oxygenation part in pillar number two, and then the alkalizing part, because your cancer cells, or cancer cells in general, don't thrive in an alkaline or an oxygenated environment, but they do thrive in a low oxygen, high acidic environment. So we certainly want to change that environment around, and that's part of pillar number two. Pillar number three is the immune boosters, right? We always want to boost the immune system. So as an example, in the conventional model, not good or bad, right? In the conventional model, they will do chemo, radiation, or surgery. And if they're doing chemo, there's nothing done to support the immune system. So we know chemo creates a catabolic effect. It's a breakdown. It disrupts white blood cell count. It breaks down your immune system. So it's a catch-22, right? We're killing the cells, but we're breaking your immune system down. Well, our thought process is we want to help build that up simultaneously, so at least there's no net negative. Even if it stays where it's at, we're happy, but we still would like to build it up. So it's kind of like, when I go through this plan, it's kind of like the 30 chapters of a book, right? The conventional model may do 1 or 2 chapters, but there's certainly 28, 29 more chapters that you could do to increase your upside without, doing too much damage, if you will. So I think that's vitally important, the immune system boosters. And then pillar 4 are the causes. And that's what the class has been on the last at least 4 or 5 weeks, is these different causes that may have created your cancer, right? So we talk all the time about, some of those causes. Tonight, epigenetics may be one of those causes. So we'll talk about that. Your diet, your gut health, your liver and its ability to detox, toxins in the system, right? Non-metal toxins, heavy metals. What about infections, bacterial, viral, fungal infections like mold and yeast, all parasites, all these different things create an elevated immune response that then causes your immune system to overwork, become dysregulated, and then you get free radicals, right? And free radicals, if you remember, are atoms that lose an electron. And when those atoms lose an electron, they become unstable and they'll start creating oxidative stress. If we have a lot of oxidative stress, it starts to damage the DNA of the cells. And those cells that are damaged start to replicate out of control, and that's cancer. That all starts with inflammation coming from somewhere, right? So again, things that will promote inflammation are foods, poor gut health, leaky gut, parasites in our gut, right? A poor microbiome, etc. We could have infections, we could have mycotoxins, toxins, etc. All could create inflammation that causes free radicals. But then there's stress too. How about your cortisol? How about your hormone imbalances? How about your blood sugar, right? All those different things can create inflammation that creates the free radical damage all the way down to cells that replicate out of control. So those are your 4 pillars, gang, right? So pillar 1, again, the testing. Pillar 2 is going to be your starve phase, kill phase, oxygenation phase, and then your alkalizing phase. Pillar 3 is going to be your immune boosters, and then pillar 4 is going to be your causes. So the details of that, going back to my son's analogy, right? The details of that you could write out if you're a patient here, and write out what you're doing within those 4 pillars to test whether or not you think, or I guess measure whether or not you think you're doing a thorough enough job. And if you need me to help with that, we'll do that. But we can take it step by step, write it all out, and compare and say, hey, are we doing the kill phase, the starve phase, the oxygen phase? Are we doing alkalizing, or boosting the immune system, and how? And then are we starting to get the causes checked off the box? And the causes, gang, the pillar 4 is going to take a little time. It's like eating an elephant, which is like 1 bite at a time. Okay. So again, there's your 4 pillars. That's the review on the thoroughness of it. Specifically, RGCC test, we talk about it all the time. It's a test we send to Greece that tells us a lot of good information. Chemo agents that you're potentially most sensitive to. It could tell us your natural agents that you're most sensitive to. It could tell us some repurposed drugs that help starve the cancer cells. It could tell us your circulating tumor cells. All really good information to individualize the care, okay? And then we get into your nagalase test. If that enzyme is up, we know that the immune system is being blocked, basically, right, from attacking the cancer cell, or your macrophages specifically. And the PHI, if that's elevated, we know you're in a low oxygen environment. So we're going to recommend things like ozone or hyperbaric. If you have D-dimer, we know that potentially things are moving a bit. So we're going to bring that down as well. And there's specific protocols that we use to do that. And then, of course, your cancer antigens. So pillar number 1 for us allows us to create a more individualized, more comprehensive plan that's based more on you than just cookie cutter. Okay. So again, that's pillar 1. The RGCC is probably one of the most important tests that I think that should be done because we want all that individualized, or all those individualized answers. And then, like we talked about, pillar 2, we talked about the starve phase, we talked about the kill phase, the oxygen phase, and the alkaline phase. So here we do fractionated chemo, and it all depends on how aggressive, the cancer is and what we recommend. But low dose chemo or fractionated chemo here, we do our IV therapies like vitamin C, for example, mistletoe, that help raise your immune system function and also kill off a lot of some of the cancer cells. The modalities that we offer: hyperthermia, endolaser, ozone, LED, infrared, lymph, hyperbaric, all part of the phases of killing and oxygenating. Repurposed drugs we talked about, and then the advanced therapies that if we need it. So that's a recap of pillar 2. Pillar 3, your immune boosters, we talked about them: vitamin C, mistletoe, and there's a ton of them, as well as a lot of the supplements that we recommend. And some of those supplements are specific to the RGCC test and the results that we get from there as well. And then, of course, pillar 4. So pillar 4, again, are all those different causes. So one of those causes, and I mentioned a lot of them, but one of those causes may be your epigenetic factors, right? So we talked a little bit briefly. I explained what the epigenetic factors are and what that means. But Dr. Ptak is here, so I'm going to have Dr. Ptak come on. You guys shut the door if that's okay. And those epigenetic factors, she'll talk about. So here, just a quick, Dr. Ptak, this is just that slide of some of the causes, right? So everybody, you can see the things that I've talked about, whether it's your foods and deficiencies or lifestyle, obesity, inflammation, stress, right? All these different environmental toxins are on there. But one of the things that are on there are the genetics, right? And this concept of how my environment can affect my genes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let Dr. Ptak kind of do her thing, because I didn't say you were an expert. I said you're well read on this stuff. Is that fair?
I've taken some classes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and you'll have to excuse me if we're being a little redundant because I missed the introduction because I was seeing a patient. But I think the main thing we have to take into consideration to start is that these aren't the determinant genes that we're talking about. It's not the BRCA or BCL2, like the things that they're identifying in the DNA of the cancer cells.
Correct.
It's what are the genes that are governing my enzymes that are processing all of my neurotransmitters, how I'm, what kind of nutrition I need, how I'm detoxing. Those are the genes that we're talking about. And I think the most famous one that a lot of you may have heard about so far is MTHFR.
Mm-hmm.
Did you go into any of them?
No, I just did the 4 pillars.
Okay.
And then I'm handing the ball off.
Sure.
So we'll have that dialogue.
Okay, good. So the first place to start is methylation. That's kind of like the main, what's happening in the center of this pathway here. And this pathway that's on the screen, we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, but this is just an overview of the complexity of it. Methylation is a process that helps to turn on and off certain genes. And it also helps us to process different neurotransmitters, activate different vitamins, for example. And the methylation is where we need to start because that is where the main pathways are driven. So when we're talking about genes and methylation, what that means is a methyl group is a carbon with hydrogen atoms attached to it.
Yep.
And this methyl group gets passed around these circles here, and that process is called methylation. Something's being methylated, and that either activates it or inactivates it. And that is largely governed, one, by how effective that enzyme is itself, and then also what our environment is telling it to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
is it fair to say, right,
Mm-hmm.
things like trauma,
Mm-hmm.
stress, lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, we all have, like, there's stress. Everybody goes through the traumas. Everybody goes through these different environmental,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, challenges. Is that a
Mm-hmm.
good way to put it? That will then affect how that works.
Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I like to use the bathtub analogy.
I love this analogy. Listen up. This is great. Go ahead.
Okay. I can't remember where I got it from, so credit to whoever told it to me. The bathtub is our body, and the water faucet on is anything coming into it, from our emotions, our nutrition, stressors, toxins that we're exposed to, parasites, everything. And then the drain at the bottom is how we process it. So literally leaving our bodies, stool, sweat, breath, urine, to these pathways here, processing them and helping to move them, along where they're supposed to go.
Which would be the drain.
The drain.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the drain at the bottom of the tub. And then the water in it is, if the water overflows, now we're symptomatic because, so much has built up, we're overflowing. So the considerations are, what are the things coming into the bathtub? Something like a surgery is gonna, fire hydrant open into the bathtub. And then how open is my drain? Is there a hairball in it? Am I, really processing things the way that I need to get that inflammation down and help these genes to function? And so the genes are at the drain. That's really how we're processing things. And the first step to cleaning our genes for anyone is going to be turning down the water. If your water is not on as high, even a mutated gene can still handle what's coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And even someone who does not have a mutated gene, that you can still dirty it by having the water too on. Even if a gene is functioning at 100%, it can't go as fast if the fire hydrant's on. So it might be helpful in that case to talk about what we're even talking about with SNPs and mutations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So each gene is encoded in our DNA. If our DNA is like a book, that is, how we're made. All of our genetic information is a book. A gene is like a sentence of that book. And the mutations we're talking about can be, for the purposes of this conversation, they're usually very small. It's like the change of a single letter, so that you could even read the sentence and the sentence still looks legible, like it's functioning pretty well.
Functions, right.
When a small mutation like that happens, and that's called a single nucleotide polymorphism.
They call it a SNP, by the way. She mentioned SNP. So if you ever hear SNP, it's that long, those Scrabble words that you could use, but we'll call it a SNP.
A SNP's the single change to the DNA in the whole sentence of that gene. Some SNPs change the function of the sentence more than others. And a kind of silly example is the phrase, "Let's eat, grandma." If you say "let's eat, comma, grandma," that means, okay, grandma, it's time to eat. But if you say "let's eat, grandma," and there's no comma,
right.
That's
good point. It's going to change. It's going to change the outcome of how you perceive it.
And most people hear that sentence and know what you mean. So like the gene still functions, but it makes
it's altered a little bit.
Yeah.
But maybe not enough to throw everything off. Fair? Okay.
And so these genes, that's why they're so sensitive to our environment, because it just depends on the person who's listening to that sentence and interpreting it, or how quickly you have to read it. So those are the SNPs that we're talking about, the changes to the genes that we're talking about. And each of these enzymes on the screen, all of these hexagons here, those are different enzymes that are passing along our neurotransmitters. You can see dopamine and epinephrine there. Different vitamins are being passed around. And so since they're all interacting, we have to be able to see the big picture. And that's why we lean on these bigger genetic tests, because they can tell us more. Yeah,
and so to kind of summarize, these genes, right? We're all born with mutations, right? It doesn't mean that the mutations are affecting us negatively. However, if we have enough of the dirty water going in the tub, so to speak, right? And we have enough, there's traumas and there's lifestyle considerations that, whether it's poor lifestyle or a lot of stress in my life or whatever, right? You get the idea. These mutations can then create what they call an expression, right? They could express, they could basically turn on. Is that fair? All right. So the idea, to keep it as simple as possible, if those genes get turned on, they could possibly disrupt the pathways that make your body work, right? So there's detox pathways that could be affected. There's pathways that affect your hormones and the ability to get rid of, say, excess estrogen. There's pathways that affect how you process inflammation. There's pathways that affect your neurotransmitters of the brain. There's pathways, right, that affect, I don't know if it said vitamin D, but how you absorb vitamin D. So to keep it simple, we all have mutations, but these genes get turned on, and there's a book which Dr. Ptak has called Dirty Genes. So Ben Lynch is one of the foremost authorities. I think he's one of the best that I've seen out there that understands this stuff. And he talks about them being dirty. And when they become dirty, that's when these pathways could be affected.
And the symptoms express.
And those symptoms could be everything from anxiety. They could be
estrogen dominance.
Yes.
And it's interesting because, and Ben Lynch talks about this in his book and in his podcast and things, some of these mutations, we wonder, like, why do we have these mutations? Why do they keep going through generations? And there is, some evidence that they can be kind of helpful. People with
survival,
MTHFR mutations tend to be, really get things done and are very dependable and actionable. And people with COMT, that one affects our neurotransmitters. They're generally with that, and then they can be a lot calmer in the face of a high stress. So those are like the brain surgeons sometimes.
Exactly right. So they could be, well, they use the term upregulated, downregulated. They can be fast, they could be slow. This how would I put it? This subject can be very complex. We're going to try to make it simpler, but from an understanding standpoint, But is it safe to say, like when I've studied this over the years, and when it's resurfacing, because I think the mutations, okay, let's back up and see if you agree with this. The mutations, we've all been born with them. They've been around forever. There's always mutations. However, I think they're becoming more expressed because of the poor lifestyle.
The environment. No one can really turn off the faucet as much anymore.
That's exactly right. And we talked about it. I mean, the stressors and the environmental factors and the pollutants and the toxins. I mean, if you want to call the overload principle, I think that's fair to say, which then causes these genes to express and the pathways to become more affected, I think, than they ever have. Is that fair to say?
So, and then to take it a step farther, we think, okay, well, if we can't really turn off the faucet, how do we open the drain more? How do we, what can we give to make the enzymes function better? And that brings us to cofactors and enzymes.
Awesome.
Unfortunately, those things are deficient a lot in our nutrition now because of the way agriculture has gone. And so that's why we need to lean on supplements strategically and not forever, a little bit more now.
It's a great point. So, and I'll go back and quote Dr. Ben Lynch, right? He talks about when these genes are dirty, and the pathways might be affected, especially if you find it, right? You find these mutations, you find, there's suboptimal performance and so forth. And we're going to get to testing that can really identify these. But what he says is we may have to Band-Aid the pathways so the system works better. So for example, if I'm stuck, in this example, and I'm not making enough dopamine because I have a mutated gene.
Or you have, a slow COMT processing it, you might need to give the precursors.
That's right. So great point. So reading the testing, you're able to see in the pathway what might need to be given. That, again, when we talk about, gang, specificity or individualized care, I'm not sure it gets much more individualized than this. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
I mean, I think this test is so important moving forward. And again, the point I'll make is we may need to Band-Aid, right, through the pathway so you function better. But the reality is, to Dr. Ptak's point, we can clean the gene, right? We can clean up the water going into the tub. And when we do that, we can turn down the expression. Is that fair? Like we can scrub the dirty gene. That's what Dr. Ben Lynch, right? He has a book called Dirty Genes, which we'll reference. But he'll talk about you have to clean those up. And the way you clean them up is really look at the causes that we talk about in Pillar 4. You're cleaning up infections, you're cleaning up stress, you're cleaning up, your diet and your gut health and your ability of the liver to process and detox, and you're cleaning up toxins and chemicals. Then when you do that, you start to turn, I use that example as a faucet wide open. If the faucet's wide open, that's the gene expressing itself big time. But if I clean it up, I can turn that faucet down to a drip drip. Now the pathways might not be affected as much. Is that fair?
Yes.
Hopefully that makes some sense, gang, but that's kind of it. And then we'll give some examples in a second, but go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, I think, so when it comes to, okay, if we do the test and we get all this information about ourselves, what do we do? The first step always has to be eliminating the things that are coming into the system.
That's
in
right.
fact, that might be the only plan you get at first, is to just take the burden off. And then we have to be strategic about which genes we want to support. Because as you can see in this picture, and maybe it's not as clear to you as it is to me, but these different molecules are getting passed from enzyme to enzyme, from gene to gene. And if we push one to go faster, that might be backing up
something
one next to it that's
downstream,
slow.
right?
So it takes a practiced eye to be able to say, out of all of these things that could be, contributing, what's the priority? Like, what's the main one that we need to start with that's not going to overburden the rest of the system? And
a little bit to that point too, we also, when we're looking at this test and say we see a suboptimal gene or a gene not functioning well, you may not be symptomatic, to your point, right? The sentence might be a little bit altered, but you can still read the sentence and get the data from that sentence, right? And understand it. But so we also have to correlate subjective findings, what the patient tells us, and look at the gene that's being maybe suboptimal, and find out if we even need to address it. Sometimes we might not even have to address it. I know, again, it gets a little complex, but I think that's always worth noting as well. Yeah, fair? Okay, all right, I'll let you rock and roll.
Yeah, well, and so main concepts are precursors, cofactors that the enzyme needs to function. That's like, you know, this enzyme is trying to convert molecule A to molecule B, but it needs a B vitamin to do that.
Right.
That's a cofactor. So giving precursors to the enzyme molecule A, giving cofactors that make it move, those are all going to stimulate the gene,
Right.
you know, make it express more.
It's kind of like if you had a train track and there's some train tracks missing, but then there's 20 miles of train track that the train can go on. We're just filling in the missing train track. Yeah, filling in the gap so the train can go. Now it runs really, really well. So to your point, and some of you may know this, and this is a good correlation, your methylated B9 and methylated B12 are often used with the MTHFR gene mutation, right? And a lot of you have already had that tested, and there's reasons why. And that could be enough to just put the track back in place and the train can keep going. It could be.
Or by, you know, fixing that gene, we're putting stress on some of the downstream.
That's exactly right. Which is when we talk about this test that we're doing now, and we'll explain it and whatnot, but that's relevant to looking at the test collectively instead of just, oh, you have this, we're going to give you that. We have to look at it a trained eye, to your point. So, and I figured, let me give an example of this, right? Just a quick, and I use vitamin D because I think it's an easy one. If you, so I had a patient the other day, and Liz is probably listening, but she said, I'm a sun goddess, right? I'm in the sun, and my vitamin D is always low, right? Or we have another patient that says, I take vitamin D and my D is always low. What's going on? Well, just a simple example. Some of these genes that are tested tell you whether or not you absorb vitamin D properly. And if they're mutated and they're not working properly, you're not going to convert vitamin D from the sun into usable vitamin D. And you may even need D3, K2, and vitamin A to absorb vitamin D. Well, if you didn't know that, as a simple example, if we didn't know that in this gene testing, we might be missing the mark. As simple as vitamin D. Now, there's 100 examples of that, but I like to use that one because that's like, oh my gosh, you read that and you go, well, wouldn't it make sense before we start doing X, Y, or Z to have a genetic test like this, a map that tells us more specifically, even, so this is the deeper dive. This is going even deeper than what most go. The test.
Yeah.
Fair?
Yeah. So I guess we could transition to that, but
for
anyone who's interested in the book that we're talking about, Dr. Ben Lynch's Dirty Genes book, there's a quiz in it, and it's very interesting to go through and document, oh, check this off. I have this symptom. I have estrogen dominance. I've got increased homocysteine every time in my blood test, even though I'm taking all the B vitamins in the world. This can help you identify, maybe before you even do the test, which genes are dirty.
That's right. And,
you know, maybe you do the test and those genes aren't even mutated. We still have the dirty genes concept where the genes can be affected by the lifestyle stuff.
The lifestyle, yeah, great point.
Yeah, so should we jump into the test?
Yeah, and listen, no affiliation. We just love this book. I have it on audio, right? So on the way to work, I'll pop it in. On the way back, I'll pop it in. I'll just constantly listen. And he explains it so well in more of a layman term that I think you would get a lot out of it. I recommend that all the time. No affiliation. We just think it's a good reference for you.
And it really emphasizes how, like, you can get all this genetic information and say, what the heck do I do about this?
Yeah.
Who is the expert who's gonna decode this for me? And it's not, you don't always need it to be that intense. There's a lot of just basic lifestyle things, and when to eat protein during certain parts of the day, and just being mindful about different forms of different B vitamins. You know, it could be as simple as that.
Yep, exactly right.
And that's what I like about the DNA test that we're using.
Yeah. So to get into that, there's the test, and again, no affiliation. We just use it so we could collect data. That's how we do RGCC. That's how so the DNA company is the test company. It's called the DNA company. That's simple.
Yeah.
So the DNAcompany.com, you can always go on and look at that. But what they do, I think better than anybody that I've seen, and maybe you could agree or disagree, they basically compartmentalize it, right? So if you don't mind, and maybe you know it off the top of your head, but I wrote down the compartments that they test, right? Do you know off the top of your head?
Well, I mean, let's see if I can try. So there's a sleep one, cardiovascular health, what are like genes that are impacting my cardiovascular risk factors?
Yep.
And back to sleep, what are genes that are making it easier or harder for me to have a good circadian rhythm and stay asleep at night?
Pleasure response, food response, environment response, stress response within the sleep. Within the sleep one, just that one. It has 5 different reports within just the sleep one.
And then there's the hormone one, how we make hormones, how we break them down, why we might have certain metabolites of estrogen. You might be familiar with the 2, 4, and 16 hydroxyestrogen metabolites.
I did want to touch on that because I think that's important, right? Real quick. So again, remember the deeper dive, gang. So if we did a urine test, we use one from physicians' labs. That's the one I like. There's ERT, there's a bunch of them. But basically what it's going to look at is estrogen metabolites. So your 16As, your 4OHs, right? Things like that. Now, those are known to be, correct me if I'm wrong, but dangerous metabolites.
Certain ones of them and the ratio of them, and more often for premenopausal women. Yeah.
So if they're elevated, right, probably a next step I would think is to then do a test like this to see if you have mutations that are not allowing you to clear them properly. Is that fair? There's the deeper dive. So that's the lateral thinking, like, well, if we see this, we should probably do this. And then as an example, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, if I have that gene that's mutated as a woman or even a male, because those metabolites can cause prostate cancer as well, right? I want to be taking things like DIM or Indo-3-carbinol or Myomint or something like that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think the controversy is it the metabolites themselves that are causing, or is it more correlated because we have the dirty gene?
Well, that's the point. So that great point. So my thought is let's look at them together. Let's figure out a Band-Aid. Remember we talked about the Band-Aid. So in my opinion, and again, you can always interject because this is the way I think, and I don't know if it's always right. I would be doing the DIM or Indo-3-carbinol or calcium deglucarate or something to clear out those excess estrogens, right? But I would also want to identify the gene that could be creating it and start cleaning that up.
Exactly.
Is it fair?
Yep.
Perfect. So that's the idea. That's where the Band-Aid comes in. But that Band-Aid, and remember, let's look at it, context of everything. We're talking about pillar 4, which could be the causes potentially, not directly, but indirectly, just like a mycotoxin. Well, we test that, right? A mycotoxin from your mold exposure. That could be creating inflammation. That could be creating oxidative stress, right? That could be a big part of why something developed. Fair? It's no different. We're not saying it's a direct, like, hey, it's going to cause cancer. We're just saying we're trying to uncover, I think, the layers of the onion. And I think this might be a big layer. Fair to say?
Yeah, and what's exciting about it is how new it is.
Right.
Because there's so much that they're already identifying in the data about what makes this gene work better, what lifestyle factors, what conditions it may be associated with, and we're just learning more. So, and that's the cool thing about the DNA company that we're using is they're constantly going back to the patients that they've put through their programs to say, oh, now we know all of this. Let's give an updated report. So they actually have reports coming out constantly for your genes, even after you've done the test, because they find out more information about it.
Which is fantastic. So this is, I think, to that point, I've been studying this probably 7 or 8 years. The problem I've always had is if you just look at this, slide right here, and listen, I'm going to go to the next one because it's going to blow your mind. This is part of it, right? And then you get into this, like there is a ton of biochemistry that if you really don't understand it, you can mess somebody up. Fair? So when I started studying it, I realized quickly that I'm going to need a year or 2 years at least to really understand it. And over the years, I never had that kind of time to put into it. So although I knew this was a big deal, I couldn't delve into it because I honestly didn't trust myself. And I wouldn't do that to a patient, right? You're probably the same way. Well, the company now, which is great. So what Dr. Ptak was saying, go ahead. They break down the different, this is the coolest thing. So they break down, she mentioned cardio, right? And there's 4 reports just within the cardio: inflammation, high cholesterol, hypertension, and statin use. Then they break down sleep, 5 reports: circadian rhythms, pleasure response, food response, environment response, and stress response. Again, I apologize for reading this, but I think it's super important. So, and I couldn't memorize it.
And it might jump out at you as, wow, I have been struggling with that. No matter what I do, I can't lose weight.
Diet, nutrition, 7 different reports: fats profile, carbs, microbiome, your macros, vitamin A, C, D, zinc, gluten, insulin resistance, and lactose.
Yeah.
Hormones, 7 different reports that Dr. Ptak already went in. Here's a biggie. This is what I see a lot: mood and behavior. 11 different reports: addiction, depression, anxiety, empathy, burnout, ADHD, procrastination, motivation, fear, irritation, and frustration, thinking patterns, and neurotic tendencies. That might be, in my opinion, one of the most, the hormones in that. And then immunity, right? And detox. Detox, antioxidants like vitamin D, methylation, and anti-inflammation. So all these, they're going to test genes within each one of those.
And it's not a gene per report that you just mentioned.
That's right.
What's nice about the report is that it's a combination of several genes tested, and so it might even be a little redundant.
There is overlap.
This gene is impacting this and this and this,
right?
And so it just helps you, see the big picture.
Exactly. So with that, and so I use the vitamin D example, I use the hormone metabolite example, but that's just 2 examples of what you can extrapolate from this test, or what can be extrapolated from this test. So when I read this test, so Dr. Ptak did the research to have this testing implemented.
Yeah, and
right?
I did interview the CEO, Kashif, previously on the Perfectly Healthy podcast. I think it was several months ago now.
Yeah, it was.
So you can hear him talk about it firsthand.
So with that, I ordered a test for a patient, young guy, 17 years old, depression, anxiety, was basically not going to school. He said he was sick all the time. You could tell something was definitely wrong. So I ordered this test, and don't tell anybody, but I'm continuing it a couple of weeks ago. And this between us, by the way, and I guess hundreds of people. But anyway, I was listening with one ear, but I was going through the report and really studying it. How many pages?
I mean, even the practitioner report's like about 100 pages.
Yeah. So his mom sent me all his data. So I was going through the patient report, right? Which is even more grandiose. So anyway, I'm reading through it and I'm studying it, and I'm learning, and I'm taking notes. And I was just in awe of all the information that was gathered.
And how it fit. It's
and
almost
how
like,
it fit.
it's like getting your palm read. It's like, how does it know this about me?
Exactly. So we were able to, with that, is overcome. So he had a lot of, in that mood and behavior one, he had a lot of neurotransmitter epigenetics, or the expression of the mutations in that area, that they listed as optimal and suboptimal, and like it goes from good to bad in 4 different stages. And they list each mutation as such. So then you can correlate back to the patient's history and their subjective complaints, which is what they're telling you, and go, okay, this is what's going on. This is what he's going to need. So as an example, I was telling Dr. Ptak, this patient needed, so his methylation was affected, his MTR was affected. He had a lot of crossover with other things. And basically it said, if these are mutated, then methylated B and 9, or B12 and B9 won't work, but folinic acid and adenosol B12 will. I was just like, okay, like that was there's just things that just you go, oh my goodness, I would have never gotten that. I would have done B9 and B12, methylated B9, and it may not have helped them near as much as doing these two.
Right.
As an example, that's just, we did a lot with him, but that was just one example. But that, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and then sometimes it gets even more nuanced. Sometimes you need some of the methylated or activated B9 or B12, and then you also need the other forms, the folinic or the adenosine. So I've even given both at the same time, just to make sure we're not overdoing it in one direction or the other.
Agree. That's exactly right. So it does get a little hairy, right? But again, when you talk about trying to heal somebody that's going through a chronic disease, if those genes are mutated and expressing themselves, we may have a hard time getting them fully back. Right? Is fair? I don't know. That's my opinion. Yeah. Right? That's my opinion. So that's why I think a test like this that we probably start doing as a standard operating procedure. And we're working on that stuff, gang. So we wanted to introduce it and let you know, hey, these things exist. And then we're working on it as a clinic to implement it and figure out how to do it, which we'll talk about in a second. But go ahead.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's as simple as, okay, so we've had our visit. Now we know where we need to turn down the faucet, take the fuel off the fire. Then sometimes it's as simple as a well-chosen B complex or a good balance of Bs, because B vitamins and minerals are the most common cofactors that we need to drive these enzymes forward. And so you can see a few of them listed on this picture here. Like in the COMT, which is under the orange gear, that one's the one processing the neurotransmitters. In the purple circles, COMT is magnesium. It requires vitamin C, magnesium, and copper. And that's an interesting one because everyone for the past 2 years has been taking so much zinc.
Yeah, right.
So much zinc, which depletes copper. Yep. And so these people that have COMT challenges who are now getting deficient in copper
could be turning that gene, dirtying the gene more, right? So then finding those specific things for each person that's like, maybe they need to supplement copper for a while. Yeah, right. So as you can see, gang, just even with that one example, this is getting the deepest dive, quite honestly, right? You know how we talk about the RGCC and we talk about nagalase and PHI to get individualized care? I just don't know sometimes if we can get much more individualized than this. So I love it because it follows what we're trying to do. It's following the individualized medicine concept as opposed to just cookie cutter, right? And I think that's what I'm geeking out on more than anything, that it's like, oh my God, it's one more piece of information. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned it, but after I read through the test, what did I do that night? I ordered my test, my own test. I'm like, that's it. My wife, kids, everybody, we've got it going. So we'll get those back. I'll share the details with you. Yeah. And I should mention this picture because it's got this other test on it. Epigenetics RX is a test that I was using back when I was in school still. So that's the one that I learned from. And now I'm using the DNA company just because it's what we do here. And they test a whole wide array of genes. And the report that you get has so many actionable steps. Or, okay, what do I need to start doing right now before I even meet with my doctor? Lifestyle, behavior, supplement, right? They give it all. Some recommendations. They can't get specific because they're not your doctor. Right, so that's our job to interpret and then to figure out. And you use the good word, actionable. So back in the day, one of the things that a lot of people did was the 23andMe, right? So the 23andMe, it's pretty cheap overall, but it is what they call insight. It's just telling you pages of genes that could be mutated. Well, there was additions to it where they would start saying, oh, because of this mutation, you should take this supplement. But then, and another gene would say, because of this mutation, you can't take this supplement. So what are you supposed to do with that? Right. So it was insight, but it wasn't necessarily actionable. Though this test, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, gives you actionable steps that you can incorporate on your own, basically, right? That's the cool thing about it. And that comes to our next challenge, which we were talking about last night. So if you got that test done here, right, we're still reviewing 100 pages of notes to try to give you a plan. that we're trying to figure out how to overcome that, because that's at home, us doing hours worth of data crunching and extrapolating the data to formulate a plan. And we still haven't figured that out yet because it's time and we're not sure. And then even, okay, so I'm giving you the behind the scenes like talk, right? So then we're like, okay, well, even if we increase the charge to compensate for the time, we still don't have the time. So we talked a little bit about strategy. So talk about some of the strategies we discussed last night.
If they're a patient?
Yeah, if they're a patient.
Yeah, so I think, starting off, it's really hard to give a plan for this information if we don't know you.
Right.
So for people that are established here and, check up somewhat regularly, at least, so that we know what your pain points are, like what your primary symptoms are.
Yeah, your subjective complaints, yeah.
Then we start to get a clue of, okay, these genes are likely dirty, or as we're reading the report, we can say these are the major contributors. We know where to start.
Your symptoms will guide us. Like my patient, I knew to look in behavior and mood right away. So I was able to extrapolate a lot of data just from that one section. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's really helpful when we know you, and if you do the test, giving us a couple weeks in advance after you even get your report to have it on our schedule. We make sure, because we get a separate report than you, making sure that we have that in our portal and have had time to review it. Maybe we even do like a discovery call, like if you want to review it with me and we haven't met before, but you've been a patient at the center, but you want to make sure that I have everything I need to review it. We just do a quick call to set that up for the meeting where we actually say, okay, here's your plan based on your genes. I think that kind of strategy, being as prepared as possible, is best. And then making sure we have enough time to go over it. Because what I love is educating and saying, this is what this result means. If you want me to, I can just say, here's your plan. But I think you don't benefit long-term if you don't really understand where that's coming from.
The value, right? And our that's why this class I love, right? This conversation is because I feel the value is in you learning that you don't necessarily, I use the term, you want to be the best doctor that you know. You want to be in control of that. Well, the only way you can get to that place is education and information. So it's the same with this test. It's like, okay, learn about what mutations were found, learn about what symptoms are occurring, and then learn about the strategies to be able to overcome them. Because right or wrong, these things can turn down and turn right back up, right? They can fluctuate. Fair? You get to, right? So if you don't understand them really well and you don't understand what to do about them from a cost standpoint and clean up, they could just do this and certain eating.
Yeah, and example with one of my patients is some insomnia related to MTHFR. So, that's a pretty straightforward history based on everything we've been talking about. Give her the methylated B vitamin, B12, and it improves anxiety a lot. A couple months go by and she's still taking it. She even takes a little bit more. And then all of a sudden she can't sleep.
Yeah.
And it was just as simple as dialing it back, take a break, find the balance. And if you know those things, that can happen you've been educated, it's, to just back off on that. Yeah.
So great point. So one of the things too, did you say that the DNA company itself has either tutorials or they have people there, scientists or doctors? I don't know about doctors, but scientists that can help you?
Yeah, so there's different packages that you can buy. The main one is the 360 report. And that's, everything that we talked about here. That includes some podcasts to get you started. So in addition to this book, that's just an amazing place to start. And, all you really need, especially if you're not going to establish care here or, really follow up here.
And that's so, when we tell you about this test, we just love the information. It doesn't mean you have to use us necessarily, right? For the test and the interpretation, you can get educated with the resources that we gave you. The DNA company has resources that will help you as well. There might be a fee for it, which I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's some additional packages where you get a little more insight, or you get a one-on-one with a health coach to help you implement some of the lifestyle changes, or you get the executive package that you get like monthly meetings with the expert scientists.
So if you hear me saying week after week on this conversation, I'm not biased to the clinic or right, or these tests or anything else. What I'm biased towards is the plan. And I think the 4 pillars, as long as you're working through the 4 pillars and you're using some of these tools that we're teaching collectively and leaving no rock unturned, that's when I feel like it's risk management. It mitigates your downside and maximizes your upside. That's what I'm a fan of. Now, the clinic here just has a ton of resources and great people like Dr. Ptak and Dr. Keeley and Dr. Carlton and all the clinicians and the resources and the strategies. I believe that we're probably one of the more thorough clinics in the country, if not the world, with all that under one roof. That's what I believe. But my biasness is really more towards the plan and making sure you understand how thorough you can be with the 4 pillars to maximize your upside. Fair? Yeah. So I always say that. They're probably tired of hearing me say that, but I think it's relevant.
Me too. I agree.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's, do you have anything else right now, Doc? I think we covered a lot of the good stuff.
The main stuff. And yeah, I'll say that the test is still growing.
Yeah.
It's a startup company, and they even test for more genes than they report on because they don't have enough actionable information on it yet to give it to you.
Right.
And so, just being mindful that I haven't seen a DNA test that tests every gene that I want them to test.
Sure.
So, nothing's perfect, and
It's
there's
growing.
just always a great place to start. The main genes are tested.
Yeah. And even Dr. Ben Lynch, he really talks about 7 of them.
The main ones.
The main 7. So this is a good start. And I think if I remember right, when I was listening to him, he said, look, these are the ones that I think are most affecting health. These are the ones that I think are some of the most common. And that's why he picked these 7. Is that fair? So cool. Yeah. And so I think that's a good start for a lot of you too, if you're interested in this kind of testing or this kind of information, which I think, again, my opinion, future of healthcare, this is in my opinion a major part of the future of healthcare. I can't see how not, based on, again, remember this concept, gang. We've for years, go back through history, everybody's born with mutations. We don't, in my opinion, again, this is a little bit of a stretch, but the things that we're seeing as far as mental health decline, neurodegenerative diseases, right? Cancers, heart disease, mood disorders are huge, right? I do believe because of the overload, it's affecting our genes, and the genes are expressing and then creating faulty metabolic systems. Is that fair to say?
It's a compensatory thing.
Yeah.
The symptoms are meant to be a warning sign,
right?
Not a sentence.
Right. Yeah. Great point. Yeah. So it's just like, okay, the oil, this analogy is so old, but the oil light in my car just went off, right? We're not going to put a piece of tape over it and keep driving. We're going to figure it out, right? So if there are these symptoms that are going on, or, Dr. Ptak and I were talking last night, we have patients that are just, over the years, they were challenging for me, where I did all the tools in the toolbox and I'm thinking, what is going on here? I'm pretty sure
probably something going on.
The mutations, either I was missing some big antigen, like a big infection or something like that, or both. That was going on, and their genes were probably a little dirty. And when you don't have that tool in your toolbox, and again, like we said, with more stress and more environmental factors and just it loading on and over, I think our mutations are getting worse and worse. That's all. That's my thought. And I don't think it's going to get any better. Right. So,
we are so quick to supplement something if,
that's
we're
right.
deficient, and
sometimes not the right thing.
Well, and it can burden the system. So I will just say that in the center of this diagram here, we're talking about methylation.
Yeah.
And then there's all the downstream pathways which are affecting our sulfur metabolism. So people that have sulfite sensitivities, how we break down histamine. So the people that are very sensitive to allergies. So when we're putting burden on those systems, it might make the allergies worse. Or, people don't really realize that NAC, cysteine has a sulfur group in it. So some people that are sulfite sensitive, even taking NAC, which is supposed to be the precursor to glutathione, the master antioxidant, even that could burden the system too
could be a
much.
problem, right?
So, you know.
Yeah. That's why this information can be super helpful, right? So that's Princeton grad right there. See, she's it's true. That's true. That's true. She's smart. That's what I would say. It's a compliment.
Thank you.
Anyway, okay, so yeah, hopefully that makes sense, gang. I just think when you look at pillar 4, again, bringing it back to context, I think we're trying to leave no rock unturned, trying, right? And I think this is a big part of this pillar 4 as far as potential causes to chronic disease, right? And it was reinforced when I started to delve into that test and you know, read the book again, and I'm thinking, geez, this is so important. And I've known it for years, but I didn't have any actionable test. It would have been all on me to interpret the data, and I just didn't feel comfortable. But now with this test, they help out a ton.
We could be a team.
We could be a team. That's exactly right. Good point. Okay. All right. So Q&A. All right. Oh, good. The APOE 3/4, and also it's connected to high cholesterol.
Yeah. So ApoE is a apolipoprotein that basically circulates in the blood, and it helps us, it dictates a little bit how we carry fat through the blood. So certain alleles, and what I mean by that is, because it's a little different than SNPs that we were talking about, those single mutations, is ApoE is a little more related or similar to like eye color. Like we have blue, green, brown eye color, and that just governs a little bit more how we carry cholesterol. It's not necessarily a mutation, as it is just a pattern that we adopt from our parents. And there's different pros and cons to different alleles that we get from our parents. ApoE4 in particular is a little stronger at carrying cholesterol. So we have to be more careful with things like coconuts and the really high cholesterol content foods, because it will raise the cholesterol. Is the cholesterol doing damage per se? Not necessarily.
Right.
We got to do further testing to see if it's impacting you. The reason why we test ApoE3 or ApoE in general to see what our genotype is, which we get from our parents, is ApoE4 has been connected to Alzheimer's and some other, dementia related conditions. And this one's actually very interesting because I've done some training in the Alzheimer's dementia space as well. And there's actually an evolutionary advantage to having ApoE4, which predisposes us to Alzheimer's.
And what is that?
It causes a little more, it makes us more prone to inflammation, which actually makes us better at fighting viruses, parasites, bacteria. So
catch-22.
Yeah, catch-22. And then also it's important to note that ApoE itself, having ApoE4, does not necessarily mean we always have an increased risk.
Sure.
There are other genes that play a role in our inflammation, particularly our neuroinflammation, that mitigate or make it better or worse, like BDNF, which helps us build healthy synapses. That one's tested as well in the DNA company test. So both of those are. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great answer. Okay, so HMPCC or Lynch syndrome, and is it controllable by epigenetics?
So that's a little more of a determinate gene change. So it's not gonna on its own be dirtied or can be scrubbed clean.
It's there. Yeah.
What are the other risk factors?
Right. Exactly. So, okay. So Jennifer asked, what are your thoughts on having breast lumpectomy surgery to remove lesions and margins and to debulk cancer cells? Speak often about chemo radiation, but not surgery. Is surgery a good strategy, especially if you want to use comprehensive medical strategy afterwards instead of chemo radiation? I'll let Dr. Ptak answer that, but I'll say Sorry, doc.
Mhm.
Chemo, radiation, and surgery are definitely the three main strategies within the conventional model. And any or all three of those may be very beneficial at times. That's definitely what I'll say.
Yeah, I think a challenge is when's the best time?
That's right.
Some people want to try it naturally first. What are the risk factors? What are some of the actual genetics of the cancer? What are receptors does it have that make it more maybe faster growing? How much time do we have to work on things naturally without that? And then when it comes to surgery, because that is the easiest way to remove tumor burden.
Yeah.
It gives us more time and opportunity to suppress everything else. So if that can be done first and the timing is right, then that just makes the window a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Keeping in mind that surgery is a major trauma to the body.
Yeah.
And it's necessary and we recommend it all the time. And we agree with our conventional oncology counterparts that it's a very effective way of reducing tumor burden, of course.
Yep.
And it's interesting because something like surgery will dirty our genes temporarily. So having a strategy on board to mitigate risk and prevent the spread that can be associated with procedures and cleaning up our genes as much as possible beforehand,
That's right.
Those are all important.
Yeah, no, great answer. And Jennifer, real quick, I used this example in a couple of classes ago or conversations ago, but there's somebody close to me that had a 5 millimeter cancerous tumor in their breast. And so when they met with the surgeon said, look, this is an easy one, right? She was very, very 22 years, very confident. She said, look, we removed this. I'll check the borders, make sure everything's good. 3 weeks of followed up with radiation. And then we'll talk about, the other part of that is the hormone blockage, right? So when we ask the questions, the main questions that I asked is, well, what is the percentage of what do you see success-wise they give over a 5-year period, right? It was super high. If we did this and we did this, it's super high, very confident about it, right? So that's the route we went with because it made the most sense. Now, having said that, then that person came here, did the RGCC test, did all the testing that we recommend, and is currently working on pillar number 4, right? And going through, and then even backing up, when they were going through surgery, beforehand, they did vitamin C, they did hyperbaric, they did things to Dr. Ptak's point, to make sure that we're not dirtying the genes too much. We're getting the body ready for the surgery. And then the recovery afterwards was similar. It's making sure that we're mitigating the downside. So for that person, as an example, that worked really well. And again, afterwards, the RGCC test was done. Thank goodness it was 0. But now they're on a strategy like this stuff of trying to figure out what could have created it in the first place and clean up the whole thing, right? So those strategies can be really, really effective. You just have to, I think we always want here anyway, an oncologist on board and information given by all parties, and then allow you to filter that and then make your decision that you feel most comfortable with. And I know Dr. Cornelia a lot of times will recommend surgery, chemo, or radiation, just depending on the severity, where things are, a stage of the cancer, things like that. So it's kind of like we're going to evaluate it and give our truth based on what we would do for our own, family member, if you will, or ourselves. Fair?
Yep.
That's a lot. But okay. So, but I'm confused with why we take DNA tests at all for cancer, because my test showed cancer doesn't run in my family, but then the doctors say the test really doesn't matter. So why do we take it? It's costly. I'll let you take that.
Yeah. So this goes back to the types of DNA that's tested.
Right.
There are determinant genes that, if you have this gene mutation, like BRCA, you are this percentage more likely to develop a reproductive cancer, and that is passed down.
Yep.
If you don't have a family history of a reproductive cancer and there's no BRCA, then the doctor's not going to say, oh, well, there's no genetic component.
Right.
That's what that is.
Right.
This test is testing the genes that make our enzymes. It's the instructions that make the enzymes that deal with inflammation, hormones, neurotransmitters, everything.
Yeah, almost apples to oranges.
Yeah, so if we're having a high inflammation response, if we have a hard time breaking down inflammation, our body's going to be more inflamed than the person next to me. We have a higher risk of things like
Chronic
cancer,
disease.
Alzheimer's,
Yep.
autoimmune disease. And so, yes, there's no family history of this cancer because there's no determinate gene for it, but you personally might have an increased risk of chronic disease based on, these factors.
Yeah, that's exactly why the DNA test that we're talking about is
Mhm.
critical, because in pillar 4, it's the causes.
Mhm.
So we want to know if there are any specifics that we can gain that can help you so you're not as inflamed, so your hormones clear out, so your detox pathways are working well. It just creates less of a downside, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, good. All right, so family members are all big built, but I am underweight since teenage years, despite being a big eater. My blood work appears fine, except for very high LDL. I'm plant-based eater, little to no red meats, but I do consume a lot of eggs. In your opinion, could there be an issue in my metabolic pathways?
Yeah, so that's an interesting consideration. I'd be curious about the cholesterol in your family members. Sometimes we can have what's called familial hypercholesterolemia, at which point, everyone in the family, no matter how hard we try with our diet, we just hold on to cholesterol more,
Right.
or make it more. And I don't know if that's exactly related to some of the DNA genes that we're talking about here. Eggs do have a lot of cholesterol in them. So I think maybe that's why you mentioned it as a consideration. I'm not suggesting that getting rid of eggs would be helpful for you, especially because we would want to maintain a healthy weight.
There's more to that story that we have to collect, right?
Yeah,
unfortunately, Charlotte. So.
And the DNA company report, what it suggests is there are genes that can correlate different percentages of the macronutrients with either weight gain or weight loss. So for some people, starch is going to cause weight gain and it won't for other people.
Right.
Same with fat. So it doesn't go as specific as why is my LDL high, but it gives a general dietary recommendation.
Exactly. And you could look at some of those pathways that could affect it too. So
and LDL being a cardiovascular risk factor, how's the rest of my profile looking?
That's right. Collectively, right? Because to that point, if HDL looks really good, right, maybe the risk is lowered because of the ratio. You're protected. Fair? Yeah. All right. So calcium deglucarate and hormone-based breast cancer prevention. Talk more about that. I was on it for a few years and now I'm not. 45 years or 4.5 years post chemo and surgery. I wonder if I should be back on it. These conversations so helpful. Thank you. All right.
Yeah. So calcium deglucarate can help lower circulating estrogen. And the way that it does that is specifically blocking an enzyme in the gastrointestinal tract called beta-glucuronidase, which is a risk factor for colorectal cancer. And it's often present with a lot of dysbiosis and inflammation in the gut. And so what it's responsible for is reabsorbing estrogen that we're trying to get out of us. Like we've processed it and we're getting rid of it. Beta-glucuronidase reabsorbs it, and calcium deglucarate blocks that. So I usually only use calcium deglucarate if I've tested beta-glucuronidase in the stool.
Right.
Stool
GI
test.
map does a good test with that.
Yep. GI map and GIFX does it as well.
Okay.
To see if that's a reason why the estrogen's high. Yep. And so, my strategy for lowering estrogen is just dependent on the constellation of factors. Yeah,
because you have calcium deglucarate, you'll have the DIM, you have other things that to use to herbs. Yeah, for sure. So
and checking the pituitary hormones. And,
Yep. Which pituitary hormones, things like thyroid and TSH and growth hormone, ACTH, FSH, prolactin. Yeah, all those are biggies too. Already tested with the company Genetic Genie. Will the test be sufficient?
I'm not familiar with the Genetic Genie, so I can't weigh in on that.
Yeah, but I am not either.
You can download sample reports from the DNA company website, and I think Kashif, the CEO, actually put his report online, so you can see which genes are tested and an example of what.
And then you can compare.
Get.
Yeah. Okay. So what green test do you recommend?
Genetic
It'd be gene, maybe?
gene test?
I would think, since we're on that topic. So it's from the DNA company. That's what it's called.
Yeah, we're using the DNA company. And the main genes being the MTHF. Well, I don't know if it's helpful for me to just list them right now.
Yeah, do it, because they
this-
can take
Okay,
notes.
so for those taking notes, MTHFR, basically the ones in the on the screen here, that you can see. So the MTHFR, MTR, MTRR, which help to replenish the B vitamins. BHMT is related. Well, okay, we don't need to go into all the detail.
Yeah, DAOs,
The
right?
COMT, DAOs, DAO, for processing the histamines and things,
Mhm.
and the MAO
Yep,
is also, there's MAOA and MAOB. And then one thing that's in the Dirty Genes book that's not on the DNA company test yet is PEMT,
Mhm.
which tells us if we need extra phosphatidylcholine.
Mhm. Yeah, that's it. And the tough one is that I don't know if any test isolates them. They're gonna test a bunch of them. Like even Ben Lynch's test from Seeking Health tests.
It says, yeah, you can't like select
Right.
specific genes that you want.
Yeah, the test is gonna test a lot of them. Let's see. What does MTHFR cause a problem with dental sedation like nitrous oxide? Any dental stuff?
Huh, I haven't,
Clearing.
yeah, I haven't thought about, because when we test it, we're looking for producing nitric oxide, like for blood pressure
Right,
maintenance.
right.
I haven't heard about that mutation impacting how we respond to dental sedation.
Yeah, it's something, if there is a problem, it's usually with clearing it and or they're absorbing it, or it's upregulated. Something's upregulated where it goes boom and they may knock out. But I don't know specifically, we could answer that one, but I think there is a potential that there's some genes that could be affected that make you more sensitive to it, right? That's fair to say. When should someone take DIM?
So it might be useful if there's estrogen dominance. What it's doing is driving the pathway in the liver that's breaking down the estrogen. So it'll drive lots of detox pathways, not just for estrogen, but it can cause some mood symptoms, some GI upset. It's a broccoli sprout extract. So sometimes even just doing broccoli sprouts for all the added benefits that those bring would be a better strategy than just taking the supplement.
Right. Good. I like it. Yeah. And again, we would recommend that depending on a bunch of testing and then seeing specifics and then going, okay, DIM might be a good idea because of X, Y, or Z. And then again, even now with a test like this and them testing the hormones and how you're clearing and all that, another layer to it that might help. So you asked Marley about what did I supplement? Well, there was a lot of things actually.
And I met with him too.
You did, okay.
And I looked at the report, and I think the main thing for him was actually the lifestyle factors.
Yeah, right.
He was having genes showing that he would have a hard time with circadian rhythm.
That's right.
For example, but he was purposefully staying up.
Yep.
And so, we don't want to push the supplements until we get those lifestyle things in order.
Yeah, and that's definitely somebody that really needed to take ownership. And but it's that catch-22 of, wow, if we did this, maybe he can get to step 2 or 3 or 4. Because I've been working with him for a while and he just never followed through with anything. So I'm thinking, geez, what gap can we fill to just get him like going a little bit, So it's a tough one sometimes. Like CMT mutations, can cause a problem with too much zinc, which can lead to copper deficiency.
Sure. Yeah. So what I was saying was, so there's COMT mutation. COMT, the enzyme, requires zinc as a cofactor to function optimally. And
over the last few years with the
pandemic and everything, people have been taking a lot of zinc, which zinc and copper compete in our digestive tract for absorption. So if we're taking zinc every single day, we're not absorbing copper. So over the months, we're depleting ourselves of copper, and people with a COMT challenge, it might be exacerbated because they don't have enough copper because the zinc is suppressing it.
Okay, so let's see. So Dr. C may have said not to take iron, copper, glutathione. I have a comp and don't methylate. So I need zinc for COVID non-reoccurrence, but I need a ratio of copper, but not to take copper because cancer could be brewing.
Yeah, and then we're getting into the nuances of one practitioner versus the other and different expertise and experiences and research. And I am not as afraid of copper, especially if we're doing it with zinc.
And you're keeping the ratios in check because there's always that question with iron, right? And it's like, well, iron's implicated in so many pathways of the body. And if we're low on iron, people are saying, well, if you have too much iron, it could feed cancer, but you need enough for the body to function properly, right? So it's that catch-22 a little bit. So yeah, I mean, tough answer, but.
And glutathione is one of those controversial topics too.
Yeah, it is.
Because cancer cells can produce their own glutathione to protect themselves from our strategies, whether it be chemotherapy, immune system. And so the strategy for not giving glutathione is that might protect the cancer. Do we need it? Sometimes yes. And it is, it's a hard answer. And so I wouldn't want to weigh in without knowing more about your history.
Agreed.
There's sometimes a place for those things for short amounts of time.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And again, it might be, the strategy might be make sure we're working over here to be able to allow those pathways to work a little bit better too.
Yeah. And, what are your symptoms? Are you really showing symptoms of the dirty genes?
Right.
Or is it something else?
Yeah. Yeah, true. Good point. So somebody asked if they could bring their 40-page MTHFR genetic report to get direction from us. It's a hard one.
Yeah. So I'm curious as maybe just to clarify, and you don't have to answer it, but I'll just say either way. If it's just about the MTHFR gene, that's a pretty simple thing to go over.
Right.
If the 40 pages is of a report that we're less familiar with,
that's a tough
one because we don't really have a system that onboards your results and like gives us time to review it.
It would probably be becoming a patient, like to your point, being it if you're not already, and then going through the onboarding process of a consult and understanding history, and then bringing that in potentially at some point. But so people ask, hey, if I bring you this test, can you review it? Well, sometimes we're not familiar with the actual test, and so we get. I think we are familiar with a lot of them, but sometimes it would have to take us actually doing the research of that company and that test. And that's a tough one. That's a tough ask, right? I'm not saying that that's the case, but probably the best strategy would be become a patient if you're not already, get with a clinician, let them know your history, and then pull that in as one of the adjuncts to care.
And maybe start with the book and, see how far that can take you.
And even some of the podcasts, like you said, So are there genes that cause food cravings or supplements that help to stop them? In the past few months, I've developed cravings for salty and crunchy foods.
So there are genes that influence the neurotransmitters, which would help govern our, like dopamine. If we can't break down dopamine and it lives longer in our system, we make it as a response to eating a certain food. It stays in our system longer. We're going to have a higher reward response to eating that food. Right. So
more of an addictive
type personality. And so cleaning up that gene may help. There's also there's other factors. Sugar does stimulate an enormous amount of dopamine, regardless of what your genes are. And that can throw off our hunger and satiety hormones, which are not related to these genes. Right. But, and then there's the emotional component.
This next one is such a good question.
Okay.
Right. So, and then we'll be careful, but I think it's wouldn't it be helpful if children were given a test like this before they get vaxxed? Right. to see if they can detox out metals or other ingredients that might be hard to excrete for those that have a hard time detoxing.
Yeah, well, and I think what makes it feel controversial is the implication of the vaccine, but I think it's related to anything. Like going on an airplane,
right,
and managing the radiation and toxin exposure, and so irrespective of if it's before or after a vaccine, kids are enormously susceptible. They are
especially nowadays,
and they're very symptomatic, and fortunately they also bounce back really fast.
Right,
they heal very quickly when you give them the tools, because their body, the tub's not over full. It's so receptive. Chronically.
But yeah, something like that, when we talk about adding a fuel to the fire, right? If there's already, I always say, if there's already a lit fire going on, and there's already, to your point, maybe some mutations that are occurring that are affecting pathways, and we add more fuel to the fire, basically we're adding another potential trauma, if you will, to the system that can dirty the genes more. And that could be for anything though. But yes, this is the challenge in today's world of, I'm going to mandate, right? Without truly understanding immunology, what happens in the human body, what's going on in the human body before it's administered, things like that, I think are neglected. And I personally, this is my opinion, so I'll say it's more of my opinion than maybe the clinic or anybody else, but I think we do a very poor job, and we don't really do a job of screening before we do something like that. And I think that's a major, major problem. That's my opinion. And again, I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I do think it's important to look at these things. I do think it's important, if somebody has a history of sensitivity reactions and, maybe parental autoimmune disease and gut health issues and things like that. I think it's very important to recognize that as potential fuel to the fire that's only going to be lit even more when we introduce something that's going to spark our immune system to work even more.
And to our point earlier, though, we can have a clue as to some of those things going on before we ever do
That's exactly right.
Assessing the child and saying, did their speech develop at the right time? That can be related to genes.
Oh, absolutely.
And so you get that information early, and then you kind of know, and there's things like with the lifestyle to clean it up first.
They go back into the cross crawl reflex and looking at the neurodevelopment, and if it's been delayed, and then you go back and you look at metabolically, well, what's going on metabolically, and then what was going on with pregnancy, and did the mother have a tough time? Do they have autoimmune? I mean, I've seen it working with some of those things, that there's so much to look at, to your point. Yeah. I may have missed this. Did we order, the Dirty Genes book? Yeah, you can order it through Amazon.
Yeah, we don't carry it.
Yeah. You can have this copy though. It's Dr. Ptak. No, I'm just kidding. Do we order the 360 test directly from the company? Yes. And then the results sent to you.
So there's a special link. I should have brought that. I wonder if we can post it.
Oh, Miss Sandy. Hey, Sandy.
Do we post it into the portal?
Yeah, what we'll do is I'll have Shep, our I guess marketing IT guy. I'll have him send it in the email follow-up. Yeah, I'll make sure.
So if you order it through the link that we're going to post, then the results will come to us.
Yes.
If you order it directly from the website, you won't be affiliated with us. We won't get your name or birth date or results or anything. We don't have a good system for you sending the results to us. So if you would like it to be associated with us, use the link.
Yep, that's good. Thoughts on thyroid nodule biopsy, 4 millimeters, TIRADS 4A. Tough one.
Yeah, that's tough because it's on the smaller side, but the other factors of its shape, where it's located in the thyroid, the orientation of it, make it look like a higher risk. And I think my blanket statement, and this might not directly apply to you because I'm not familiar with their history, testing, really knowing what's going on is better than waiting for a problem to get worse.
Yeah.
For fear of what the outcome might be.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's common for them to be benign.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I do know a lot of Hashimoto's cases that have benign nodules and so forth. So if Hashimoto's is there, that could be it. And then, it's hard to give advice like that because we always have to be careful, just because of the liability. But, nodules, I don't know, the biopsies can be tricky sometimes and so forth. So hard question. I wish we had a more direct answer, but, so the metabolic pathways on the epigenetic slide, MB and MN, what do those correspond to? They're the minerals.
Yeah, those are cofactor minerals. So MB is molybdenum and MN is manganese. So whenever you see that associated with a gene, that means that gene needs that to function. And so those two, molybdenum and manganese, are particularly important for sulfur metabolism, for example.
Yep. The NutriBelt test tests a lot of these, the Bs, the manganese, the molybdenums, things like that. So that's another good test sometimes to do in conjunction with CA19-9 is elevated and high SPGH, low Dow. What genes would we look at as provided by the DNA company on the 360 test?
Okay, a lot going on here. So tumor markers elevated. And then I'm assuming this is sex hormone binding globulin?
It's gotta be, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And low DAO. So does that mean that the gene's low, or that maybe we're not processing allergens very well, and so we need to supplement with it?
It's certainly the hormone section, right? To look at that. But it's not, I don't know we'd be looking at specific genes. I think we'd be looking at collectively.
Kind of the global, because it's a little all over the place here. Sex hormone binding globulin can be correlated with our amount of testosterone and estrogen, other androgens. Also how much we're exercising.
But that'll cause some less free hormones. So if you had, sometimes your albumin or sex binding globulin hormone is high, you'd have lower testosterone, free testosterone, lower free thyroid hormones, things like that. So that could be a big deal.
Yeah. So
I'm just not sure.
Why don't you take a look at the DNA company sample report for the hormones?
Yeah. That's probably a good place to start.
And the immune system, because that'll go into tendency for allergies.
Agree. All right. So DNA tests just show the genetic information. They also show the degree of expression.
So the DNA company test, it'll tell you if you have one mutation or two or none.
Yep.
And that's because we get information from regarding genes from our mom and from our dad. And so we can get one copy of a mutation or two.
Right.
And it depends on which gene to say that equals a percentage reduction in function. So the test will tell you that, and then it will tell you if that means it's going to go faster or slower. And then what that means for the neurotransmitters or the hormones or the inflammation or the circadian rhythm that it governs. So it tells you how to match your symptoms to the gene, and then the lifestyle factors for cleaning it up.
Exactly.
And then it might suggest some type of supplement to consider, but it doesn't make specific suggestions. And we'd be careful with that because of
upregulating
how it affects
downstream. Yep. DES in utero predispose me to certain gene mutation.
I think the DES is a little less specific. It's like a general toxin causing general mutations, but it's not usually a toxic exposure that's causing these gene mutations. It's more of an inherited factor.
Right.
So just simple as, did we get it from our mom? Did we get it from our dad?
Right.
DES can predispose us, unfortunately, to a lot of different things.
Right.
But not necessarily a gene mutation that we're talking about.
WOB enzyme, when is it beneficial? It's just like a proteolytic enzyme, strip into the cancer cell, right? So it strips the cancer cell. The cancer cell has proteins. If we take it on an empty stomach, it's designed to work to strip the proteins from the cancer cell, so the immune system can basically break through and do its job.
It also helps to break down the infrastructure that the cancer cell uses for metastasis and spread.
Name of the podcast, that was on the DNA.
So the podcast is actually Through Perfectly Healthy, which is the
for us
clinics podcast.
Right.
So that's linked to on our website.
Yep.
It was a handful of episodes ago, a couple months at least.
Yep.
Um,
But then on the DNA company website, there are podcasts as well, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? I'm pretty
but
sure.
it's ours on there.
Oh, is that okay? Okay,
Mhm.
fair. So on the DNA company, okay.
Mhm.
And then how does it compare to the nutrition genome test? It's part of it. Like this is one part, right?
Mhm.
If I'm not mistaken, the DNA test has that as well, but a bunch of other stuff where the nutrition genome is kind of,
Oh, I'm not, is this the Nation Winters
I think,
one?
I'm not sure, but
I haven't personally seen that
yeah,
test, so I can't compare exactly.
yeah, it's just way more. That's all.
Well, and maybe potentially more information for you, like what do you do with it?
Right.
Mhm.
As far as the DNA company one.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right, gang, I know we're way over. It's 6:42. We went long.
We're having fun.
That's right. So, hey, hopefully this helped, right? Again, another thing to look at when we're working through the causes. And Dr. Ptak and I talked about this last night. Like working through pillar 4 they're all important. All the pillars are important, right? But pillar 4 is kind of like eating an elephant. It's one bite at a time. We're not going to be able to tackle everything right away. But if we have a list of things that we want to work through based on your symptoms and based on, just what you think may have caused it, stress, whatever, we can start at least making a priority list and working through that list. And I think that's the best strategy with incorporating something like this in the strategy at some point.
Mhm.
Like, fair to say?
Yep.
All right. Okay, gang. Have a good couple weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay. And we'll send out all the information to let you know exactly what we'll be talking about on the next class and conversation. So I want to thank Dr. Ptak. I want to thank you all for being here. Have a great couple weeks and we'll see you soon. Much love to everybody. Be good. Keep working hard, everybody.